Hotep World, this your brother Matthew Daniels, aka Ampu, aka the Chosen Few, aka the Real Bookworm. I'm not a bookworm, I'm the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. And as always, world, may your name live on forever and may your memory never die. Hotep, cheers to that. Are you guys familiar with the legends of the phoenix? Right? Generally, when people talk about the phoenix bird, your mind is going to automatically picture a really large sized bird, either on fire or made of fire, right? That is being reborn from ashes or something like that. It generally encompasses the idea of rebirth, fire, flame, hot, rising from the ashes, etc., etc. Now, you may have seen various movies, TV shows, you may have seen it referenced to in various books. But what the Real Bookworm wants to do, I want to take you and I want to show you some of the most ancient accounts of this mythological creature. And I'm going to show you what the ancients actually said. Now, I'm going to go to several different sources so you can see how this phoenix bird was conceptualized in different time periods and from different societies. Now, the first version of this story that we're going to look into is in my book called The Landmark Herodotus. Now, Herodotus wrote a work called the Histories. Okay, now in Herodotus' work, the Histories, he talked about the phoenix bird. And so what I want to do, I want to share his account with you guys first. If you don't mind, give me just a second. Let me adjust my camera slightly. Okay. Now, we're going to get right into it. This is the account of the phoenix bird as told by Herodotus over 2,400 years ago. And this is in his work, The Histories, Book 2. He says, "But there is another sacred bird called the phoenix. I myself have not seen it except in paintings, for it rarely visits Egypt. Indeed, the people of Heliopolis say that it comes only once every 500 years. They claim that the phoenix visits them when its father has died. The paintings, if they are accurate, depict the bird in shape and size very much like an eagle with both golden and red feathers." So he's automatically telling us that this phoenix bird shows up in Egypt every 500 years. And it only shows up in Egypt from wherever it came from. We'll get into that later. After its father has died, right? And when he describes the bird, he says it's generally depicted in the same size and shape of an eagle, and it has both golden and red feathers. So if he's describing it as having golden and red feathers, you can see why it would ultimately be associated with fire. And nowadays, when you see a phoenix, you either see a bird made of fire or a bird on fire. Let's continue and see what else he has to say. "They also say, though it seems incredible to me, that when the phoenix sets out from Arabia toward the sanctuary of Helios, it carries the corpse of its own father plastered up in myrrh and buries it there in the sanctuary." So now he's telling us that this phoenix bird is living somewhere in Arabia before it shows up in Egypt. And once every 500 years, when its father has died, it leaves from Arabia and it flies all the way to Egypt. And it brings with Egypt the corpse of its father. And it takes it to the sanctuary, the temple, the altar that is in the Egyptian city known as Heliopolis. Now, Heliopolis is like the city of the sun, right? And there's more correlation with the fiery burning aspect of what we know to be the phoenix bird. He goes on to say, "Thus it transports its father, but in order to do that, it first shapes some myrrh into an egg as heavy as it can carry. It then attempts to fly with it and keeps adjusting the size of the egg until its weight is just right. Then the phoenix hollows out the egg and places the body of its father inside it. It fills in the gap thus created with additional myrrh, so that when its father is laid within, the egg weighs the same as before. When the egg is completely plastered shut, the phoenix carries it to Egypt, to the sanctuary of Helios. At least that is what they claim about this bird. So when the phoenix, when its father dies in Arabia, the phoenix bird takes myrrh and it creates like an artificial egg, right? Then it begins to hollow out the egg and places the corpse of its father inside of this egg. Then it plasters it back up with myrrh. It then picks up this egg with his father's dead body in it, carries it all the way to Egypt, and places it in the sanctuary in the holy city of Heliopolis. And this is Herodotus' account of the phoenix bird. Now, there are more things that I can tell you about the phoenix bird, but what I want to do, I want to go to some more sources about this mythological creature, and we're going to see if we can understand more things about it. From what Herodotus tells us, it's about the size of an eagle. It has golden and red feathers. It comes from Arabia to Egypt every 500 years when its father has died, right? And it brings the corpse of his father to the city of Heliopolis inside of an egg made out of myrrh, and it sets this egg with the corpse inside of it in the sanctuary in the divine city of Heliopolis. Now, the next source that I want to read about this is actually kind of odd, right? This is a book called The Lost Books of the Bible, okay? Now, in this work, we have books or letters that were written by some of the early church fathers. Now, you wouldn't imagine that you would hear the story of the phoenix from one of the church fathers, but that is what you are actually about to hear. There is a man named Clement, and as tradition goes, Clement was the disciple of Peter, right? So you had Jesus teach Peter, Peter taught Clement, and I'm going to read to you an excerpt from one of the letters that Clement actually wrote, in which he talks about this phoenix bird as if he believes, Clement believes, that the phoenix bird is real. Now, I want you to understand something. Clement lived from around 35 CE to around 99 CE. So he was in the 1st century, right? Now, what Clement tells us about the phoenix, his version of the story goes like this. There is a certain bird called a phoenix. Of this, there is never but one at a time, and that lives 500 years. Similar to Herodotus. Maybe he got this from Herodotus, or maybe it was just a general concept that was floating around at the time. And when the time of its dissolution draws near, that it must die, it makes itself a nest of frankincense and myrrh and other spices, into which when its time is fulfilled, it enters and dies. But its flesh putrefying breeds a certain worm, which being nourished with the juice of the dead bird brings forth feathers. And when it is grown to a perfect state, it takes up the nest in which the bones of its parents lie, and carries it from Arabia into Egypt to a city called Heliopolis. So you see the same basic concept that Herodotus said. The story is basically the same, although he gives us a little more details. He actually explains that there is only one phoenix at a time. So in like manner as how Herodotus said that when the father of the phoenix dies, it brings the corpse back to Egypt from Arabia, just like Clement, from Arabia to Heliopolis. Clement is telling us that when the current phoenix, when the father phoenix realizes that it is about to die, it makes its own nest of frankincense and myrrh, right? It makes its own nest in frankincense of frankincense and myrrh. Then inside of this nest, it dies. Now, when it dies and its flesh begins to putrefy, some type of larvae, a worm, is born from the decaying phoenix bird. Now, that worm eats some of the putrefying material of the predecessor phoenix, right? And it grows into a bird. It grows into a new phoenix. Now, when this new phoenix is actually grown from the corpse of its father, Then it takes the nest made of frankincense and myrrh along with the corpse of his father all the way back from Arabia, again from Arabia, to Egypt, to the city of Heliopolis, right? And so he goes on to say, and flying in open day in the sight of all men, and so returns from whence it came. The priest then search into the records of the time and find that it returned precisely at the end of 500 years. And shall we then think it to be any very great and strange thing for the Lord of all to raise up those that religiously serve him in the assurance of a good faith, when even by a bird he shows us the greatness of his power to fulfill his promise? So Clement is using this phoenix as a real world analogy to support the resurrection that Christians believe in, the resurrection of Jesus and the ultimate resurrection of themselves. And it's really odd that when Jesus was born in the Bible, it talks about gifts being brought to him, frankincense and myrrh. And he's associating that with an ancient story about the phoenix bird. When the father is about to die, he makes a nest of frankincense and myrrh, and this is where the new phoenix is born. I'm not going to dig too deep into that, but I just want to say that is very interesting that this church father is connecting the two. So from reading Herodotus and from reading Clement, now we get a bigger picture. This phoenix apparently is living in Arabia, right? And he lives about 500 years. And when he gets close to dying, he builds his nest. He dies in the nest. A worm is born inside of the decaying flesh, right? This worm transforms into the new phoenix. The phoenix emerges from the dead body of his father, right? He creates an egg using probably what was made up of the nest, because both men say myrrh is present. And so he takes the corpse of his father, carries it from Arabia all the way back to Egypt to the sacred city of Heliopolis and puts it on the altar. So now we see why this bird is considered to be some type of resurrection. Now you understand why sometimes when you see depictions of the phoenix, it's rising from the ashes, right? And it's almost like a rebirth, a resurrection. Sometimes you've seen the X-Men movie, Jean, when Jean became like a phoenix, right? She rose from her own dead body. It's like becoming something new, right? And it's almost associated with how the spiritual body leaves from the physical body. At death, when you die, you resurrect and emerge as something new. But I don't want to get too far ahead. I just want to stick to the legend of the phoenix. So there you have the story from Herodotus, a Greek historian writing around 400 years ago. And now you hear it from a church father, right? One of the church fathers who learned about Christianity from Peter, the disciple of Jesus, right? Writing in the 1st century. And now I want to show you this story from a Roman source, right? I have several versions of this phoenix story, so I hope this is interesting to you guys. This is Tacitus. Tacitus wrote the Annals of Imperial Rome, or he wrote the history of Rome. Now, according to Tacitus, it was claimed that during the reign of Claudius, one of the Roman emperors, during the reign of Claudius, an actual phoenix was seen, right? And so Tacitus documents this account. Now, whether or not that was a real phoenix, that's not the discussion for this video, but let's see what Tacitus says about this supposed phoenix that came out in the reign of Claudius, and let's see what he says. Next year, the consuls were Paulius Fabius Perseus and Lucius Vitellius. It was now at the conclusion of an age-long cycle that the phoenix appeared in Egypt, a remarkable event which occasioned much discussion by Egyptian and Greek authorities. I will indicate the facts on which there is agreement, and certain others which are doubtful but not wholly fantastic. The phoenix is sacred to the sun. Those who have depicted it agree that its head and the markings of its plumage distinguish it from other birds. Regarding the length of its life, accounts vary. The commonest view favors 500 years, but some estimate that it appears every 1,461 years. So we see similarities between the story. We see a continuity of thought. He's attesting that the most common view of when the phoenix appears is 500 years, but he's also saying that some people say that it appears and it lives for 1,461 years. And so he's telling us that some of these accounts are actually accurate and some of them may or may not be true. So Herodotus said that he really didn't believe it. He just wanted to tell you what they were saying about the phoenix. Clement, the Christian, he believed it. Tacitus, he also believed some of the story as well. He goes on to say, and that the 3 last seen flew to Heliopolis in the reign of Susasis, Amasis, and Ptolemy III of the Macedonian dynasty, respectively, escorted by numerous ordinary birds, astonished by its unfamiliar aspects. So the Greek version of certain pharaohs of Egypt, he says that one phoenix showed up in the reign of the pharaoh Sesostris. One showed up in the reign of the pharaoh Amasis. Now, Amasis ruled Egypt around the same time that Cyrus the Great and Cambyses were ruling over the Persians. Somewhere in there, I believe it was around Cyrus the Great or Cambyses. It was somewhere in there is when Amasis ruled. And he says Ptolemy III, right? The first Ptolemy ruled in Egypt after Alexander the Great died. So 2 Ptolemies after that, he's saying that another phoenix was seen. And now during the reign of Emperor Claudius, he's describing the return of a phoenix. He says its earliest appearances are unverifiable, but since between Ptolemy and Tiberius Claudius there were less than 250 years, some have denied the authenticity of the Tiberian phoenix, which did not, they say, come from Arabia or perform the traditional attested actions. So this phoenix that they say came during the reign of Claudius, Tiberius Claudius, right? They're saying that it wasn't 500 years since the last sighting, and it didn't perform all of the rituals that they claim that phoenixes were known to perform. So it's some doubt on whether this actual account was of a real phoenix or was it of something else. For when its years are completed and death is close, it is said to make a nest in its own country and shed over it in a procreative substance, from which rises a young phoenix. Its first function after growth is the burial of its father. This is habitually done as follows. After proving by a long flight with a load of myrrh that it is capable of the burden and the journey, it takes up its father's body, carries it to the altar of the sun, and burns it. The details are disputed and embellished by myths, but that the bird sometimes appears in Egypt is unquestioned. So the things that remain constant in these stories of what people believe the phoenix to be, it was a bird that would come from Arabia to Egypt, generally known to be around every 500 years. When the phoenix was about to die, right, it would set up a nest of frankincense and myrrh and whatever other substances for himself. When this phoenix would die, the new phoenix would somehow be born from the decaying body of its predecessor, right? Once this bird becomes like grown and able to fly and take care of itself, it emerges from the body of its predecessor. It encapsulates his predecessor in some type of egg, right? Some type of container, and it carries it from Arabia all the way back to Egypt, to the city of the sun, to Heliopolis, places it on the altar, and Tacitus says burns it there, I guess as some type of sacrifice, right? So we have the Greek historian Herodotus talking about the phoenix. We have the Christian church father Clement talking about the phoenix. And we have the Roman historian Tacitus talking about the phoenix. And generally what they are saying about it all jibes and it lines up with one another. Not saying it is true, not saying that really happened, but saying that it stands true. And so all of them are saying that this bird goes from Arabia to Egypt, and it shows up in Egypt in the city of Heliopolis. So what one would have to ask themselves, is the phoenix talked about in Egypt? If everybody is saying that this bird goes to Egypt and does stuff inside of the temple, right, in the city of Heliopolis, do the Egyptians actually talk about a phoenix? The answer is no. But what individual scholars, what they believe that what these writers that I just read to you, these Greek, Roman, and Christian writers are talking about as the phoenix, in Egypt, it was known as the Bennu bird, B-E-N-N-U, the Bennu bird. Now, they actually have been found the remains of an extinct species of this bird that was that could grow to at least 6.5 feet tall. Great sized bird. So what I'm going to do for you guys is I'm going to go to this book, The Gods of the Egyptians by E.A. Wallace Budge, and I'm going to read briefly what he says based on Egyptian text, how they conceptualize the Bennu bird, right? The Bennu bird. And we're going to see if from this bird that was referenced in Egypt, could some of these mythological conceptions of what they are knowing to be the phoenix, could it actually come from this bird? Are there any similarities? So he says, among the birds which were worshipped by the Egyptians or held to be sacred, the following were the most important. The Bennu, a bird of the heron species, which was identified with the phoenix. This bird is said to have created itself and to have come into being from out of the fire which burned on the top of the sacred Persea tree of Heliopolis. It was essentially a sunbird and was a symbol both of the rising sun and of the dead sun god Osiris, from whom it sprang and to whom it was sacred. So we see some very key things, right? The Bennu bird was already talked about being self-created. It created itself, right? Which we can see how these later versions of the phoenix would talk about not actually like procreation and coming from an egg, but the phoenix forming itself inside of the decaying body of its predecessor, right? And he associated the Bennu bird. The Bennu bird was associated with the rising sun and with the resurrected savior of Egypt, Osiris, or who the Egyptians called Asar. So we see the concept of fire with the phoenix, right? Fire with the phoenix. The Bennu bird was associated with the sun and with the sun god Ra. So we see the heat, we see the flames, we see the fire. We see Heliopolis mentioned. The Bennu bird was sacred in Heliopolis. These writers told us that the phoenix went from Arabia to Heliopolis, and apparently the first phoenix was born in Heliopolis, which would make sense of why it would return to bury its father in Heliopolis or bring it back to the temple in Heliopolis, because that is the origin of the phoenix. And really every new phoenix could just actually be the resurrection of the phoenix that came before it. So every phoenix could actually be the exact same phoenix that was before it. Because remember, one would die and then the new one would automatically be born and formed inside of the decaying body, and then it would be born. And how would it even know to follow this tradition of taking it back to Heliopolis, right? And so he goes on to say, the Bennu not only typified the new birth of the sun each morning, but in the earliest period of dynastic history, it became the symbol of resurrection of mankind, for a man's spiritual body was believed to spring from the dead physical body, just as the living sun of today had its origin in the dead sun of yesterday. So now they're talking about the symbolic meaning behind a resurrection. When you die, your spiritual body arises from your dead body. When the phoenix died, the new phoenix resurrected and arose from the dead body. And that would make sense, because even when the Christian Clement, the church father, talked about the phoenix, he immediately associated it with the resurrection of Jesus, and he associated it with the resurrection that was to be believed upon by the Christians. So we see this resurrection thing, right? And the new bird was supposed to symbolize the rising sun each morning. So we see the fire, we see the heat, we see the resurrection, right? We see Heliopolis, right? We see the city of the sun. We see the Bennu bird being related to Osiris or Asar, right? The resurrected savior of Egypt. And we see this phoenix being mentioned by a Christian father, church father, being referenced to Jesus' resurrection and the resurrection that's hoped for by the Christians. So we see a lot of things that are matching up. The phoenix may actually be coming from these stories of the Benu bird, right? He goes on to say, the Benu sprang from the heart of Osiris and was in consequence a most holy bird. In a picture reproduced by Signor Lanzon, it is represented sitting on the branches of a tree which grows by the side of the sepulchral chamber, where individuals buried there. In the, I can't read that Roman numeral, but in one of the chapters of the Book of the Dead, the Per Im Heru, which provides the formula for enabling the deceased to take the form of the Benu, this bird says, I came into being from unformed matter. I came into existence like the god Khepra. Khepra is a representation of the rising sun. I am the germs of every god. According to Herodotus, the phoenix only made its appearance once in 500 years. Its plumage was partly golden colored and partly red, and in size and form he resembled an eagle, which I already read. He came from Arabia and brought with him the body of his father, which he had enclosed in an egg of myrrh, to the temple of the sun, and buried him there. Pliny says that when the phoenix became old, he built a nest of cassia and springs of incense, and that having filled it with perfumes, he laid down and died. From his bones and marrow there sprang a small worm, which in process of time changed into a little bird, which, having buried the remains of his predecessor, carried off the nest to the city of the sun. The city of the sun being Heliopolis. So, whenever you guys see a phoenix on TV, right? Whenever you guys see statues of things that can represent a phoenix, right here in Texas City at the Dog Convention Center, there's the image of a bird. Now, I haven't independently verified this, but just looking at this bird on this fountain, my mind associates that with the phoenix. That's what my mind associates this image with. So you will notice this phoenix iconography all over in all different cultures, right? And you will see this story played out in movies. You will see it played out in books. You will see it played out in TV shows. So you have this bird that symbolizes rebirth, resurrection, right? You'll see it associated with fire. You'll see it associated with flames, right? You'll see it associated with power. And when you read the original stories talk about it could only be one phoenix at a time. And when that phoenix is about to die in Arabia, right, it makes a nest of incense like frankincense and myrrh. Myrrh is a repeated thing, right? When it dies, okay, the germs inside of it, a worm, a particular type of worm or a germ is born inside of the decaying flesh of the father. This worm becomes the new phoenix bird. Now, when this bird, this new phoenix grows up, it embalms his father inside of the egg. It embalms his predecessor inside of an egg using the materials of the nest and the physical body. It will carry this all the way back to its origin in Egypt, in Heliopolis, the city of the sun, and place it on the altar. And a lot of this is all centered around the resurrection of the sun, how the sun comes up every day and it goes down. And when the next day starts, it resurrects and it comes up again. And it's tied to the Egyptian resurrected savior, Osiris or Asar. Okay, and the first phoenix bird created itself and how it tied itself into Khepra. Yes, Khepra is a deity in ancient Kemet, but you have to understand how the mythology went. Khepra is really a representation of the rising sun, right? So it's all lined up. It's all saying the same thing. It's all telling the same story. It's a bird associated with resurrection and rebirth, power, strength, and the sun, and the Egyptian city of Heliopolis. So if you ever was wondering where the origins of this phoenix bird actually came from, it actually came from the Egyptian conceptualization of the Benu bird. And that Benu bird was symbolic of the resurrection of the sun. But also another layer is the resurrection of you. When you die, your spirit comes from your dead flesh and resurrects in new form into a new life. Okay? Resurrects into a new life. So I showed you guys what Herodotus had to say about the phoenix. I showed you guys what Clement had to say about the phoenix. I showed you guys what Tacitus had to say about the phoenix. And I also showed you what the ancient Egyptians had to say about the Benu bird, which is most likely where they got their stories of the phoenix bird from. So it's like we're talking about phoenixes right now today. You see it in books, you see it in movies, you see it on TV. So we just got in our time machine and we went back, and we traced the ultimate origins of the story of the phoenix, and we found it in Egypt, in the city of Heliopolis, associated with the Banu bird, that's associated with the Sar, that's associated with Ra, and that's associated with the sun, and that's associated with you actually resurrecting as a spirit after you die. This is what the phoenix actually represents. So I hope I said something that you guys never heard before. I hope if I said something that you heard before, I hope I was able to shed more light on the actual topic. Now, before I go, as always, I got to pay a few bills, do a little commercial. Y'all bear with me. I want you guys to go to Amazon.com and order my books. Show your support. Go to Amazon, type in Suicide Note by Matthew Daniels, order the book. I want you to go to Amazon.com, type in Thicker Than Water by Matthew Daniels. I want you to order the book. If you don't like paperbacks, I want you to order the ebook version, right? If you don't like paperbacks, order the ebook version, okay? Share this video, comment on this video, like, join my group, subscribe to my YouTube channel, you know, all that good stuff. This your brother, Matthew Daniels, a.k.a. Ampu, a.k.a. The Chosen Few, a.k.a. The Real Bookworm. I'm not a bookworm, world. I'm the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. And as always, world, may your name live on forever and may your memory never die. Hotel, cheers to that. Peace, I'm out.